Can't tell the truth. Okay, so let's talk about how and why they can't tell the truth. I've said it many times. Westerners are incapable of honesty. They're incapable of telling the truth. I've explained many times. I'm not saying it's deliberate. It's not necessarily on purpose, no. That would be literally like saying someone who has no legs is on purpose not playing basketball. You understand? I'm talking about incapability, not deliberate, intentional dishonesty. I mean, obviously, there are plenty of people who are just straight up liars out of the West and everywhere else, but I'm not talking about them. I'm saying that honesty is not their language in the West. Truth is not a dialect that they speak. They don't know how to speak that language. I know people get mad when I say that, but understand, I'm actually telling you something that has been done to you. I'm telling you something that you have been deprived of. You understand? I'm telling you something that you're a victim of by your culture, by your so-called civilization. They victimized you in this way. This is the most graphic and the most literal form of kufr, of kufar, covering up, concealing, burying the truth. And this is all they do. It's the only language they know, truly. This is the only language they know. And this is why everyone around the world is quickly coming to the conclusion that you simply can't be engaged with. The Westerners simply can't be engaged with. It's just not productive. It's not productive. It's not useful in any way whatsoever to engage with you. Like I've said before, in these interactions, no communication ever actually takes place when we talk to you, when people in the global south talk to you, when Muslims talk to you. And that's a shame. It's a shame what has been done to you, but it has been done to you. It's a shame what you've been deprived of as a human being. This dysfunction that has infected, intergenerational dysfunction that has been inflicted on your culture. Now, of course, some of what I'm talking about could be dismissed as their ignorance or their misunderstanding, or some sort of a personality disorder, like you can't pay attention, you have ADHD or what have you, or you're aggressive, you have a problem with your temper and so forth, and this is why you can't be engaged with it, why there can't be productive, normal, healthy, rational conversations with you. But for me, I characterize all of these behaviors under the overarching label of dishonesty, because that's how it pans out. That's the practical impact. That's the practical outcome. You inject falsehood. You muddy the waters of discourse. You distract. You derail. You deny. You deflect. You sidestep. You bring in irrelevancies into the conversation. You bring in fake issues. You do anything and everything. Wallahi, you do anything and everything to try to stop honest discussion. You always try to obscure reality by hook or by crook. And so the practical impact of all of that, that all comes out to the same practical impact as if you were just lying. I mean, it goes much deeper than just false narratives. It's deeper than propaganda. We're actually talking about a culturally ingrained reflex against truth. A culturally ingrained reflex against true and honest discourse. This is a civilizational pathology. And in fact, it comes down to foundational morality, you see, because you have that insistence on moral relativism, which is nothing but nihilism for beginners. It means ambiguity, moral ambiguity. They're morally agnostic, you understand? That's the heart of their dishonesty. Because honesty, truthfulness, it's not just about words. This isn't just about what you say or what you don't say. Dishonesty isn't just calculated lying or deception. Honesty is not actually fundamentally an intellectual, or it doesn't originate in the intellectual sphere, if you understand what I mean. Because before you choose to distort reality through deception, before you string together words to speak a lie or to obscure the truth, you have in your heart already rejected reality and in fact the creator of reality and your inevitable meeting with that creator when you will be held account for whatever you say and what you don't say. You have imagined in your heart that you can actually weave an alternative reality. You can create your own fictional world, and that this fictional world is possible for you to somehow superimpose that upon the objective truth of the real world, and then you get to operate in your own version of the world according to your own rules, and you think that you can get away with it. You have internally convinced yourself that truth doesn't matter. So lies aren't lies. They're just equally valid alternative versions of reality. But existence is not a narrative. I said it's a civilizational reflex because it's both ingrained in the culture and because I think you can trace it back. You can trace how it grew out of the conditions, like I've talked about many times in Europe, in the West. Centuries of hard winters, thin soil, volatile harvests, recurrent scarcity, That trained whole societies to survive first and justify later. Dishonesty is a trademark of being completely dunya-centric, or what you can call materialistic, meaning that you are inordinately concerned with material things, with material survival, with accumulating resources, and so on. Very Western. When material well-being feels threatened, then truth just becomes negotiable. You start to make up the rules as you go, to get what you want and not feel that you've done anything wrong. You want to be able to get what you want and not feel that you did anything wrong in doing so. Europe went for long stretches of history inside that sort of pressure cooker, environmental pressure cooker, low fertility soils in the north, repeated food crises, and so forth. Literally centuries of bad weather. This isn't folklore. This is the climatic and agrarian record of Europe, from the Little Ice Age and its, the agricultural shocks of that, to the grim sequence of famines from 1315 and onwards, rotted crops, starving livestock, and so forth. They had a rough existence. I'm not kidding. And in my opinion, they resented that. Under those conditions, a pattern set in mentally, spiritually. First, normalize getting by through extraction. If the crops fail, then you raid the next village. You pivot to raiding, pivot to external predation. This wasn't born out of adventurism. Scholars of European history describe all of the pressures that they were under, the resource limits, demographic problems, political opportunities. That catalyzed the Viking turn to organized acquisition abroad. That's what made them do that. The method was violence, but the ethic was necessity, their version of necessity. The narrative was glory. See, that template, the template of basically externalizing the solutions to internal scarcity, this became a very durable habit, and it became your culture. You even did it. There was even a domestic version of extraction, enclosing the commons. They were fenced off. Customary rights were dissolved, and it was all done according to the language or the rhetoric of improvement. They laundered the dispossession of the people with the rhetoric of productivity and efficiency. It was a new moral grammar in which legality could sanctify harm, and policy language, or the language of policy, could bury the truth. Case histories from England show how communal governance of the land was completely dismantled, and peasant rights were extinguished under these banners of productivity and efficiency and order, and so on. Once that moral software was written at home, well, they exported it. Mercantilism that framed the whole world as a finite treasure chest to be seized and to be hoarded. The point was not reciprocity, it was extraction. Extraction justified as national strength. This is the textbook doctrine of early modern Europe. Monopolize trade, bar rivals, drain the peripheries, and called all of that prosperity. And language did the heavy lifting on that, recoding seizure as commerce and subjugation as civilization. Well, they've been lying for a long, long time. And they've been dishonest before they could even write it down. And they never got honest. This is what I'm telling you. If you move on to the modern era, well, obviously you have the emergence of what we know today as propaganda. During the First World War, America, they built a whole system. They built a whole government department for shaping public opinion. It was called the Committee on Public Information. And they pioneered methods of propaganda. They pioneered methods of indoctrination, really of brainwashing, that would later even be used by the Nazis. Okay, so this was sort of the, you can say, the official beginning in the U.S. of state corporate orchestration of public sentiment. Out of that milieu came someone like Edward Bernays and the concept of engineering consent. He understood that mass psychology could supersede public deliberation of individuals. And then you had someone like Walter Lippmann, who suggested that slogans could replace actual thinking processes. The technique matured, not only to sell products, but to sell versions of reality. If you don't know about Edward Bernays, you should look him up. He was quite ingenious. He was the epitome of an evil genius, diabolical. By the 1980s, you created what they called in academia the incredulity towards meta-narratives, which is just a sophisticated way of saying that there is no binding story. There's no final account. There's no objective truth. There's no overarching reality. There's only language games and power. But if truth is just a contest over the framing of narratives, then what's conscience? Conscience has lost any coherent meaning in that worldview. You have intellectualized a rationalization for just being the way that you've always been. You know, it's just like shoot first and ask questions later, right? Act first, then after you've acted, weave your rationale afterwards. But what I'm saying is truth does exist. Reality exists. The real world exists. The action is what it is in reality. And no narrative is ever going to be able to change the nature of that action, nor the consequences of that action, because the truth is real. But the point is, you've been doing this for centuries. You've been doing it for millennia, and it has become a pathology. That pathology has become your culture until you no longer know how to interact. You don't know how to engage with the truth. You don't know how to be honest. Because again, as I say, truth is not just about the words you say. It's a posture of your soul itself. Truth begins long before your tongue ever moves, before the mind ever starts assembling the words to say. Honesty is a covenant inside your heart. It's a willingness to face reality as it is, because you know that you will eventually face the one who made reality. And when that covenant is broken, the lies that you speak, that's just the leakage. That's why the problem isn't just propaganda. Propaganda is just a tool. It's an outgrowth of an already existing dishonest culture, of a culture that already does not value the truth or even recognize that there is such a thing. The deeper disease is a moral habit. It's a moral habit that trains a person to treat reality as optional. Moral relativism, you know. It sounds academic. Like I said, it's beginner level nihilism. Nothing matters. And that creates a sort of safe house of ambiguity where nothing